The space between worlds shook like an earthquake was happening, but this wasn't any normal place. This was the Hall of Endless Battles, a place that existed beyond normal reality, where the most powerful war gods in the universe came to meet. The air itself seemed thick and heavy, filled with the echoes of 1,000,000 different wars from across the galaxy. 3 massive figures appeared in flashes of light and shadow. The first was Karneth the Blood Drinker. He looked like a giant made of dark red smoke and anger, with eyes that glowed like burning coals. When he moved, you could hear the sound of swords clashing and warriors screaming. His huge black stone fist came crashing down on the white marble table with such force that cracks spread across its surface like lightning. Next to him stood Vextai the Battle Singer, and she was equally terrifying in a completely different way. Instead of rage, she was all about the music of war. She hummed songs that had no melody, sounds that made your bones ache and your mind feel dizzy. Her voice carried the rhythm of marching armies and the final breaths of dying soldiers. When she sang, even the air around them seemed to bend and twist like it was in pain. The third figure was perhaps the most frightening of all, even though she stood perfectly still. Morgan the Eternal Blade never moved unless she had to, but everyone knew she was the most dangerous. Her sword was always dripping with something that looked like blood, but was actually the life force of every war that had ever been fought. She had been present at every major battle in galactic history, and her blade had tasted victory and defeat in equal measure. These 3 beings had ruled over warfare for millions of years. Every time soldiers marched into battle, every time civilizations clashed, every time blood was spilled in anger, they grew stronger. Warriors across the galaxy would pray to them before fights, asking for strength, courage, and victory. Kings would build temples in their honor. Entire planets would make sacrifices to earn their favor, but something was wrong now, and it had been getting worse for decades. Karneth's voice rumbled like an avalanche when he spoke. His anger was obvious, but underneath it was something else. Worry, maybe even fear. "Our power is getting weaker," he said, and each word hit like a hammer blow. "All across the galaxy, mortals aren't calling on us like they used to. Their prayers are getting quieter. Their offerings are getting smaller." Vextai nodded, and her humming turned sad and low, like a funeral song. "I've felt it too," she said. "Remember the Altarians? They used to be the proudest warriors in the galaxy. They would sing my battle hymns before every fight and never showed mercy to their enemies. But now, even they pause before going to war. They ask questions they never asked before. They worry about things that never bothered them in the past." The 3 gods had noticed this change happening everywhere. The fierce Draknari Empire, which used to conquer 3 new worlds every year, had started making peace treaties instead. The Zephyrian war clans, famous for their brutal raids, were now talking about trade agreements and cultural exchanges. Even the savage Crimson Horde had recently established a refugee assistance program. It made no sense to the war gods. Fighting was supposed to be natural. Conflict was supposed to be eternal. Yet somehow species after species was choosing different paths. Morgan finally broke her silence, and when she spoke, her words cut through the cosmic winds like her blade cut through armor. "There's one species that worries me more than all, the others combined," she said quietly. "On a small blue planet in an unremarkable part of the galaxy, there lives a young species called humans. They've been fighting wars for their entire history, but the way they fight is unlike anything we've ever seen." The 3 deities turned their attention toward Earth, focusing their ancient power on this tiny world that somehow concerned them. They expected to see familiar patterns: warriors seeking glory, kings demanding conquest, soldiers drunk on bloodlust and the thrill of battle. Instead, what they saw made their immortal hearts grow cold with something they had never felt before: genuine fear. The 3 war gods descended to Earth like invisible shadows, eager to see what made these humans so different. They expected to find warriors drunk on battle, soldiers celebrating death, and commanders who cared only about winning. What they found instead left them speechless. Captain Hyun-woo was hiding in a muddy trench that smelled like gunpowder and fear. Rain poured down from dark clouds above, mixing with dirt and blood to create a thick red mud that clung to everything. His military uniform was torn and stained, and he had been fighting for 3 straight days without sleep. His hands shook as he held his radio, not from fear but from exhaustion. The war gods watched invisibly as he spoke into the crackling device. "Mina, we need to pull back right now," he said, his voice tired but determined. "The civilian evacuation isn't finished yet." Lieutenant Mina's voice came through the static, barely audible over the sound of distant explosions. "Sir, our scouts report that we could take the ridge if we advance in the next 10 minutes. The enemy is retreating, and their defenses are weak. This is our chance for a major victory." Karnath leaned forward, expecting to hear the captain order the attack. This was exactly the kind of moment that war gods lived for, a chance for glory, for crushing the enemy when they were vulnerable. But Hyunwoo's response shocked him to his core. "Negative, Lieutenant. Mission parameters are absolutely clear. No civilian casualties, no matter what. We protect the innocent first, win the war second." Karnath's burning eyes grew wide with disbelief. Here was a trained warrior, a man who had spent years learning to fight and kill, deliberately choosing to give up a tactical advantage just to protect people who weren't even his own soldiers. In all his millions of years of existence, the blood drinker had never seen anything like this, but that wasn't the end of Hyunwoo's strange behavior. Later that same day, the war gods watched as enemy soldiers began retreating across an open field. One of them had been shot and couldn't move. He lay there crying for help in a language Hyunwoo didn't even understand. Any normal warrior would have left the enemy to die, or maybe even finished him off to prevent him from fighting again later. Instead, Hyunwoo did something that made Karnath feel dizzy with confusion. He crawled out of his safe trench, across 50 yards of open ground where enemy snipers could see him, just to reach the wounded soldier who had been trying to kill him moments before. Bullets flew past his head as he dragged the injured enemy back to safety. He used his own medical supplies to stop the man's bleeding, gave him water from his own canteen, and even tried to comfort him in broken phrases of the enemy's language. The wounded soldier looked up at Hyunwoo with tears in his eyes, unable to understand why someone he had been fighting was now saving his life. Karnath felt something he had never experienced in all his eternal existence: complete confusion. Where was the hatred? Where was the desire for revenge? This human was treating his enemy like a brother who needed help. Meanwhile, Vextai the battle singer was following a different group of human soldiers. She expected to hear victory songs, celebration chants, and the kind of joyful music that warriors usually made after winning battles. Instead, she found Sergeant Jin Ho sitting alone in a damaged building, staring at small pieces of paper he held in his dirty hands. The papers were photographs, pictures of his wife and 2 young children back home. His wife was smiling and holding a baby, while his older daughter, maybe 5 years old, was making a silly face at the camera. Jin Ho's eyes were red, not from smoke or dust, but from tears he was trying not to cry. His friend Su Jin sat down. Next to him, also looking tired and sad despite their recent victory. "We won today," Su Jin said quietly, "but it doesn't feel like winning." Jin Ho nodded slowly, still staring at the pictures. "I just want to go home," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "I want this whole war to end, so no one else has to die. Not our soldiers, not their soldiers, not the civilians caught in between. I'm tired of seeing mothers cry for their dead sons." Vextai's eternal song of battle suddenly faltered and went silent. In all her eons of existence, she had never heard a victorious warrior speak like this. Where was the glory? Where was the bloodlust that should come after defeating enemies? Where were the celebration songs about conquest and domination? Instead, these humans seemed almost sad about winning. They acted like every death, even enemy deaths, was a tragedy rather than a triumph. They fought like they hated fighting, like they were only doing it because they had no other choice. Hundreds of years passed, and humanity had grown from a small species on one blue planet to explorers who traveled between the stars. They had built massive ships that could cross the galaxy in weeks, established colonies on distant worlds, and made contact with dozens of alien civilizations. The 3 war gods followed humanity's expansion, hoping that as humans spread across space, they would finally embrace the old ways of conquest and domination. Instead, what they witnessed made their ancient hearts sink with dread. The Galactic Council chamber was enormous, built to accommodate representatives from 50 different species. Some aliens were tall and thin like living trees, others were short and covered in thick fur, and some didn't even have bodies as humans understood them. They were pure energy floating in special containers. Despite their differences, they all had one thing in common. They were confused and somewhat frightened by humanity's approach to warfare. Admiral Tae-min stood at the center of the great chamber, wearing the simple blue uniform of the human space fleet. He was an older man with gray hair and kind eyes, but everyone in the room knew he had commanded fleets in 3 major interstellar wars. Behind him, invisible to everyone except each other, the 3 war gods watched with growing horror. Taemin's voice carried clearly through the chamber's advanced sound system as he addressed the assembled aliens. "Distinguished representatives," he began. "I'm here today to explain humanity's military doctrine, because I know many of you find our methods confusing or even disturbing." A tall, insect-like alien from the Zrix Empire clicked its mandibles impatiently. The Zrix were known throughout the galaxy as fierce warriors who conquered worlds for the glory of battle. "Admiral, your species has won every major conflict you've entered, yet you claim to hate war. This makes no sense to us." Taemin nodded slowly. "You're right that it seems contradictory, but here's the truth that defines everything we do. War is a failure of civilization. Every time we have to fight, it means we failed to find a better solution. When we are forced to fight, we do so with one goal and one goal only: to end the conflict as quickly as possible with the least amount of suffering for everyone involved." The alien representatives murmured among themselves. This was completely different from how every other species approached military conflict. Most civilizations fought for territory, resources, honor, or religious reasons. Some fought simply because they enjoyed fighting. But humans seemed to fight only to stop fighting. Colonel Hye-jin stepped forward to demonstrate human tactical protocols using a holographic display that showed famous battles from recent wars. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and the confidence that came from years of successful command. "Every engagement we plan is calculated to preserve life, including enemy life, whenever possible," she explained, as 3-dimensional battle scenes played out in the air above her. "Look at this example from the Kepler conflict," she continued, pointing to a space battle involving hundreds of ships. "We could have destroyed the enemy fleet completely with our new plasma weapons. Instead, we targeted their engines and weapons systems, leaving their life support intact. We won the battle by making their ships unable to fight, not by killing everyone aboard them." A reptilian delegate from the Saurian hegemony hissed in confusion. "But this approach requires much more precision and puts your own forces at greater risk. Why would you choose the harder path when killing enemies is simpler?" Colonel Hye-jin smiled sadly. "Because we don't want to kill anyone if we can avoid it. We win wars by making our opponents prefer peace to continued fighting. Dead enemies can't become future allies." This concept was so foreign to most alien species that several delegates began arguing among themselves in their native languages. The war gods, watching from their invisible perch, felt something they had never experienced, their own power actively diminishing as these words were spoken. Dr. Bora, head of the Human Psychological Warfare Division, took her turn to speak. She was a middle-aged woman who looked more like a teacher than a military officer, which was exactly what made her so effective at her job. "My department studies our enemies extensively," she began, "but not to find weaknesses we can exploit for destruction. We study them to understand their fears, their hopes, their cultural values, and their basic needs. We map out what they truly want, not what their governments claim they want, but what their people actually need to live happy, productive lives. Then we work to give them those things through peaceful means. Sometimes we've ended wars simply by helping enemy populations get access to clean water or medical supplies. Sometimes we've prevented wars by establishing trade agreements that make conflict economically impossible." She gestured to another holographic display showing peaceful human colonies existing alongside former enemies. "The greatest victory is the war that never needs to be fought. Every battle we avoid is worth more than 100 battles we win." Morgan the Eternal Blade, watching invisibly from the back of the chamber, felt her weapon tremble for the first time in eons. These humans had done something she had thought impossible. They had weaponized mercy itself. They had turned restraint, compassion and understanding into their greatest military advantages. Other species fought harder when they were angry or desperate. Humans fought smarter when they cared about their enemies' welfare. They won wars by refusing to let hatred drive their decisions. They defeated opponents by treating them better than those opponents treated their own people. It was the most terrifying military doctrine the war gods had ever encountered. The three war gods were becoming desperate. For millions of years they had fed on the violence and bloodlust of countless civilizations across the galaxy. Now, watching humanity's strange approach to warfare, they felt their ancient power slipping away like sand through their fingers. They had tried watching and waiting, hoping humans would eventually embrace traditional warfare, but it wasn't working. It was time for direct action. Karneth the Blood Drinker decided to make the first move during what humans called the Kepler conflict. This was a major space war between humanity and the aggressive Helix Federation, a collection of militaristic alien species that believed only the strong deserved to survive. The war had been going on for 2 years, and as usual, humans were fighting with their typical restraint and careful tactics. General Wu Jin was commanding the human forces from his flagship, a massive vessel called the Peaceful Dawn. He was known throughout the human military as a brilliant strategist who could win battles with minimal casualties. His methods were slow but effective. He would surround enemy positions, cut off their supply lines, and force them to surrender, rather than fight to the death. Karneth descended into Wu Jin's mind like a poisonous fog. The god began whispering seductive thoughts into the general's consciousness, filling his dreams with visions of glorious victory and total domination. In these visions, Wu Jin saw himself leading massive charges against enemy positions, watching his enemies flee in terror, hearing the cheers of his soldiers as they celebrated crushing victories. "You could end this war in weeks instead of years," Karneth whispered directly into Wu Jin's thoughts. "Stop holding back. Show these aliens the true fury of humanity. Strike hard, strike fast, show no mercy. Glory awaits those brave enough to seize it." The influence was subtle at first. Wu Jin began making more aggressive tactical decisions, pushing his forces harder than usual. His staff noticed the change, but assumed he was feeling pressure from the civilian government to end the war quickly. However, as Karneth's influence grew stronger, Wu Jin's behavior became increasingly erratic and dangerous. During the Battle of Kepler 7, Wu Jin made a decision that shocked everyone under his command. Instead of his usual careful approach, he ordered a direct frontal assault against a heavily fortified enemy position. This was exactly the kind of reckless, glory-seeking behavior that Karneth wanted to see. The result was catastrophic. Human forces, driven by uncharacteristic aggression, made reckless advances across open ground where enemy weapons could easily target them. Ships that should have maintained defensive formations instead charged straight into enemy fire. Soldiers, who had been trained to work as coordinated teams, began acting like individual heroes seeking personal glory. The casualties were massive. In a single day, humanity lost more ships and personnel than they had in the previous 6 months of careful fighting. Worse yet, the attack failed completely. The enemy positions remained intact, and now they had captured several damaged human vessels along with their crews. It was Commander Yun Su, fighting without any divine influence, who saved the situation. While Wu Jin raged about pressing the attack, Yun Su made the difficult decision to order a tactical withdrawal. This wasn't a retreat born of cowardice, but a brilliant strategic move that saved thousands of lives and repositioned human forces for a more effective approach. More importantly, Yun Su used the withdrawal to open diplomatic channels with moderate factions within the Helix Federation. Instead of continuing the bloody assault, he negotiated a ceasefire that eventually led to a peace treaty. The war ended not through destruction, but through understanding and compromise. Major Sai Wu, who had served under both commanders during the battle, made an observation that sent chills through all three war gods. "The gods make us weak," he said, while reviewing the battle reports with his fellow officers. "I've studied our military history extensively, and I've noticed a pattern. When we listen to our better nature, our compassion, our desire to protect others, our hope for peace, we win. When we give in to bloodlust and the desire for glory, we lose everything we fight to protect. Vextai, the battle singer, decided to try a different approach. During a naval engagement near the Titan Nebula, she focused her influence on Captain Nari, who commanded a small but elite squadron of human warships. Vextai began singing her ancient battle songs directly into Nari's mind, filling her thoughts with visions of legendary warriors and epic victories from across galactic history. The songs were intoxicating, promising glory and eternal fame for those brave enough to charge into battle without fear. They spoke of heroes who never retreated, who faced impossible odds with laughter, who won through pure courage and aggression. For a brief moment, Nari felt the intoxicating rush of divine inspiration, but her crew noticed the change immediately. Nari began issuing orders that contradicted standard human military doctrine. She wanted to engage enemy forces directly, instead of using their superior technology and tactics to maintain safe distances. She started talking about glorious charges and heroic sacrifices, language that no human military officer had used in centuries. Petty Officer Jae-min, who had served under Nari for 3 years, quietly spoke to his colleague Dong-sik. "Captain seems off today," he whispered during a brief lull in the fighting. "She's giving orders that don't make tactical sense. I think we should follow standard protocols instead of her current instructions." The crew, trained to think independently and prioritize mission success over blind obedience, began subtly ignoring Nari's more dangerous commands. They maintained proper defensive formations, used their weapons strategically rather than aggressively, and focused on completing their objectives rather than seeking glorious combat. Their disciplined approach succeeded brilliantly where divine inspiration had failed. The human squadron completed their mission with 0 casualties while effectively neutralizing a much larger enemy force. Nari, once Vextai's influence faded, looked at the battle reports in confusion, unable to understand why she had wanted to abandon proven tactics for reckless heroics. The war gods were learning a horrible truth. Their influence actually made humans worse at warfare, not better. The galaxy's darkest hour arrived without warning. From the empty space between star systems, something emerged that made every living creature tremble with fear. They called it the Void Fleet, massive black ships that seemed to absorb light itself, crewed by beings who existed only to destroy. These weren't conquerors who wanted territory or resources. They were exterminators who believed that all life in the universe was a mistake that needed to be corrected. The Void Fleet had already consumed 12 entire star systems, turning thriving worlds into lifeless rocks floating in space. They didn't negotiate, didn't communicate, and didn't show mercy. Every species they encountered was completely wiped out. Men, women, children, even the smallest microorganisms. It was genocide on a scale that had never been seen before. The 3 war gods watched this ultimate conflict approach, certain that finally, humans would abandon their strange, peaceful ways and call upon divine power for strength. This was exactly the kind of existential threat that should make any rational species embrace the old ways of warfare. Total destruction of the enemy, victory at any cost, glory through overwhelming violence. Instead, what they witnessed shook them to their very core. Private Dong-hyun sat in his small bunk aboard the human battleship, Tomorrow's Promise, writing in a worn paper journal by the light of a small lamp. He was barely 18 years old, fresh out of basic training, with the soft face of someone who had never seen real combat before. His hands shook slightly as he wrote, not from fear, but from the weight of what he was about to face. "Dear Journal," he wrote in careful handwriting, "tomorrow we fight the Void Fleet in what might be the last battle our species ever fights. I've been thinking about what to pray for, and I realized something important. I don't pray to gods of war like the old stories talk about. I don't ask for strength to kill my enemies or courage to die gloriously in battle." He paused, thinking about his little sister back on Earth. She was only 12 years old, still collecting stuffed animals and drawing pictures of flowers. She had never seen violence or hatred, never known what it was like to live in fear. "Instead, I pray to hope itself," he continued writing. I pray that my little sister will grow up in a universe where wars like this never happen again. I pray that the children born tomorrow will never have to hold weapons or learn how to kill. I pray that we can build something better than endless fighting." Karneth the Blood Drinker read these words over the boy's shoulder and felt something like nausea. Where was the bloodthirst? Where was the desire for glorious death in battle? Meanwhile, on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Dawn, Captain Yujin was addressing her crew before the final battle. She was a veteran of 15 major conflicts, a woman who had seen more death and destruction than most people could imagine. Her crew looked up to her with complete trust, knowing she had brought them through impossible situations before. "I know you're all scared," she said, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "I'm scared too, but I want you to understand something important about why we're here and what we're fighting for." She gestured toward the viewing screen that showed the approaching Void Fleet. Thousands of black ships that looked like moving holes in space itself. "We don't fight because we love battle. We don't fight because we enjoy destroying our enemies. We fight because we love peace so much that we're willing to risk everything to protect it. Every shot we fire, every life we risk, every sacrifice we make brings us one step closer to a galaxy where our children won't have to hold weapons." Her words echoed through the ship's communication system, reaching every crew member from the youngest maintenance worker to the most experienced officers. None of them cheered for blood or glory. Instead, they simply nodded with quiet determination. When the battle began, the human fleet engaged the Void Armada with devastating efficiency. But even in this ultimate conflict, every tactical decision prioritized long-term galactic stability over immediate tactical advantage. Human commanders coordinated not just with their own forces, but with alien fleets from dozens of different species, sharing technology and strategies freely. The tide of battle turned when General Chang Min, commanding the entire Allied fleet, made a discovery that shocked everyone. The Void Fleet's command ship had been disabled by a concentrated assault, and its defensive systems were down. A single powerful attack could destroy it completely, potentially ending the war in one decisive blow. "Sir," his tactical officer reported excitedly, "we have a clear shot at their flagship. We can finish this right now." Chang Min stared at the tactical display, knowing that millions of lives hung in the balance. Then he did something that made the war gods feel like their universe was ending. "Negative," he said quietly. "Target their weapons and engines only. Disable their ships, but leave life support intact." "Sir," the officer asked in confusion, "these beings have committed genocide against 12 different species. They've shown no mercy to anyone." "Which is exactly why we have to be better than them," Chang Min replied firmly. When the Void Fleet lay helpless in space, their ships disabled, but their crews still alive, Chang Min opened a communication channel to their flagship. "Void Admiral," he said formally, "your fleet is defeated, but we offer you and your people amnesty. Surrender now, and we will provide medical aid, food, and safe passage to a world where you can live in peace." The response came in a voice like grinding metal. "Why? We came here to exterminate all life in this galaxy. We have shown you no mercy. We deserve none in return." Chang Min's answer would be remembered for thousands of years. Because victory without mercy is just another form of defeat. If we become monsters to defeat monsters, then the monsters have already won. In that moment, the three war gods finally understood their own obsolescence. Humanity had evolved beyond the need for deities of conflict. They had learned to wage war for peace itself, making every battle a step toward ending all battles forever. The galaxy celebrated the end of the Void War, as former enemies became allies, as weapons were turned into tools for building rather than destroying. Karneth, Vextai, and Morgan felt themselves fading into cosmic obscurity. They finally understood why they feared humanity above all other species. Humans had discovered something more powerful than divine wrath, more effective than righteous anger, more lasting than glorious victory. They had found the courage to be better than their own capacity for violence. The age of war gods was ending, and the age of peace had begun.